My guest today previously appeared on our podcast in episode 25, where we had a great discussion about the interplay between staff and elected official. For anyone with an interest in municipal politics or thinking about running or currently there, I highly recommend a listen. My guest is a former CAO for the region of Waterloo from 2004 to 2020. He had been employed by the region starting in 1992. He was at the core of some of the most transformative years in the history of Waterloo region. I'm pleased to welcome back to the Old Grey Mares podcast my guest today to continue our discussion on the ION journey, Mike Murray. Mike, welcome from your hiding.
Yeah. Looking out at the rolling hills of Grey County. So it's good to be back. And like I said, the last time you had me back, it's always nice to be invited back to something.
Yeah, exactly.
You get invited once, but when you get invited back, must have done something right. So I'm happy to be back.
Mike, look, you're an easy discussion and an informative discussion. So, and I think it's important to, this is like an oral history of some of the things that happened. May not be always 100% accurate or detailed or what have you, but at least it's something that we've got to hold on to. Now, you're busy on a transit project right now, aren't you?
Well, I'm doing a little bit of work with the city of Hamilton on the Hamilton LRT project. So it's been another crazy roller coaster of a rapid transit project, but I'm going to say getting back on track. And
yes,
it's a Metrolinx project, but it goes right through the heart of the city of Hamilton. So
yes,
they're trying to work out all of the interfaces, which is going to be really interesting and challenging for everybody.
For all the squabbles about two-tier regional government, we certainly showed that the two-tier could perform admirably better than the one-tier did if you just looked at the LRT projects.
Yep. We could save that whole discussion for yet another podcast. The pros and cons of two-tier versus one-tier government. How's that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Now, interesting though, the Hamilton project, I understand it's like a $3.4 billion project.
Yes, it has about $3.4 billion of federal and provincial funding committed to it, and it'll be built by Metrolinx, owned by Metrolinx, the province of Ontario. And it's, I think, about a 15-kilometer LRT with maybe about 15 stations. So smaller than the region of Waterloo's LRT project, and it's going to cost about 3 times more. So
unbelievable.
Yeah, I think we got good value. We got good value for money.
Yes, congratulations on behalf of the people of the region of Waterloo. I want to congratulate you on delivering such a great project. But okay, so last podcast, we got talking about the history, which I thought was important. So it led us up to a point. And we stopped at where I got sort of had the pleasure and the privilege of a chair ringside for the next 4 years. And that's the inauguration in January of 2011 of the new regional council. And it always stands out for one. First of all, it stands out because, I figured out where I was going to sit between Doug Craig and Sean Strickland. And I always said I couldn't have had a better spot between two very active and passionate advocates and knowledgeable. Somewhat around the horn. So I always said I had the best seat in the house. But that day stood out for me because I remember during the election campaign, now being a township mayor, the LRT wasn't really a big issue that we dealt with out there. And so it wasn't even when I was at the Rogers debate, I got asked about it, and I thought it was strange I was getting asked about it. And I just flipped that and talked about seniors transportation in our township and improving on that. But when I got there, in my kind of recollection was there was some concern about the amount of funding and the level of funding that we actually got versus what was going to be needed to build it. And I always thought it was a bit of a jeopardy with respect to the project. And I remember distinctly Ken, I don't remember any other part of his speech other than I remember walking away from it thinking he really focused on, we've got to move ahead with this project. The funding is there. We can't walk away from this funding. Do I have that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's my recollection too. And it had been about 5 or 6 years of really solid work to get to that point, and all the things we talked about the last podcast, the environmental assessment and looking
Right.
at technology options and route options, all of the advocacy with federal and provincial governments to try to get the funding. So that had been 5 or 6 really full on solid years of work. And so we had technology selected, we had route selected, we had funding in place. And I think Ken was sending a pretty clear message, like, now either we're going to move ahead with it now, or it's never going to happen.
Yeah, but just on the funding side, was the expectation or was hope that federal and provincial governments would fund the whole thing? I mean, what was the?
I think there were various messages from the province over the preceding, 3, 4, 5 years. And, at one point, they had a list of projects that they were going to fund 100% of, and then they backed off of that. So, I think that was a bit of a roller coaster too.
Right.
But by 2010, both federal and provincial governments had made clear funding commitments, $300 million of provincial funding and $265 million of federal funding, which was about a third of the estimated cost of the project. So, we had a little more than 2/3 funding from federal and provincial governments, and that meant the region was going to have to come up with about $300 million to make up the difference.
Yeah, I remember there was an issue, like, for example, Sean Strickland, who's pretty sharp guy on these sorts of things, and during the campaign, the election campaign, it said, well, I can't support a 9% tax increase, which is understandable, one-time hit, but I guess that wasn't really the concern, because it wasn't going to be a one-time hit like that. Is that?
Yeah. So so now we're sort of getting into, okay, what work went on after the election in 2010.
Right. Okay.
So at that point, then we finally knew, okay, here's what the province is in for. Here's what the feds are in for. Here's what the estimated cost of phase 1 of the project was, which was about $818 million. So then it was a matter of, okay, how can we actually finance that? What's the overall financing strategy? What are some other options or scenarios for implementing the project that might either reduce the cost a bit, might increase the cost a bit? So that was the work that went on in the first half of 2011. Was a lot of work to sort of fine tune, look again at the project implementation options, look again at the financing options. How can we pay for it? And re-engage the public in public consultation. And the other thing we did was we reconvened. We had this expert panel, and we reconvened the expert panel to basically review all of the work that had gone on and sort of give an unbiased third-party view of, are we on the right track? Pardon the pun, but are we on the right track?
But it wasn't already determined what the route would be and from where to where prior to that, or it was still somewhat up in the air?
So in 2009, Regional Council had made a decision about LRT, light rail transit, is the preferred technology.
Yes.
From the north end of Waterloo to downtown Cambridge.
Okay, the Ainsley Street station.
Ainsley Street, yeah.
Yeah.
And that the project would be built in 2 phases. So those were decisions that Regional Council had made in 2009.
Right.
But that let us sort of finalize the ask to the federal and provincial governments, which we did. And then to their credit, they did finally, after many years of advocacy, they finally stepped up and said, okay, we're committing money to this project. So then by the fall of 2010, then we finally knew how much money we had in the bank.
Right. So we're in the middle of an election as well.
And we're in the middle of an election, right? So basically staff just kind of left things alone, let the politics play out. I think all of the councillors who supported light rail transit got reelected. And, Chair Sealing sent a pretty clear message on inaugural day. We're getting on with this. And so then we had a lot of staff work to do to say, okay, how are we going to finance and implement this project.
So yeah, because the ultimate decision date, so we're January, and the ultimate decision date was in June of 2011, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So when we say 6 months, that's the 6 month period that we were talking about.
Yeah.
So you have to fine tune some things in terms of, is it firming up where the stations are going to be, for example, that sort of thing?
It was more looking at scope of the project, like so. How like where was going to be the start and end point of phase one? You know, was it going to be shorter? Was it going to be longer? Because of the funding that was committed by the federal and provincial government. So we knew how much they were putting in the pot.
Right.
And so then we started to say, okay, well, if we, you know, left off a couple stations from the north end or a couple stations from the south end, you know, we could reduce the overall initial capital cost.
Right.
And then that also then meant, you know, the region's contribution would be more or less. So that was what the staff were looking at in the first half of 2011.
Yeah.
And also, you know, as we looked at those different scenarios, getting public input on, you know, what does the public see as pros and cons of different, I'm going to call it project scope scenario.
Yeah.
So then I don't know if you want to jump into, you know, where did we land with the recommendations?
Yeah, we can go ahead. Sure.
Yeah. So after all of that work, where we landed with recommendations was, you know, we should carry on with phase one from Fairview Mall, or from Conestoga Mall, north end of Waterloo, to Fairview Mall in Kitchener as phase one. And then phase two would be from Fairview Mall to Ainsley Street in Cambridge.
Right.
The region's share of the cost, I think, was about 250 or 260 million or something like that.
Right.
And so then this was a big question: how do we finance that?
Yeah.
You know, and as you mentioned, you know, Sean Strickland said, look, we can't afford this with you know, just a one-time big whopping
jolt to the
tax rate
system.
increase.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what we proposed was a financing strategy that was actually, it was 1.2% per year tax rate increase over a 7-year period. So that was to finance the light rail transit capital costs and to have enough money in the tax budget to pay the operating and maintenance costs when the system started up.
Yeah, so you not only had to think about the capital cost part of it, which is how much you got to contribute, and that amount that you would have had to contribute, the 250 or 260, would that have had to been paid like within a year or 2 years, or how soon would you have had to pay that? Because I'm sure you had to borrow or something to finance that over time.
Yeah, so that we'll come to some, you know, nuances related to that, but overall we would have to pay that as the project was getting built. So over a 1 or 2 or 3 year period, and typically when the region's building, you know, multi-million dollar projects, we're typically borrowing. We're debentering.
Yeah, and it's fair enough.
But then the tax rate impact hits in the next year.
Yeah. And I always joke because a lot of times you see it at municipalities, you know, people who like maybe have a mortgage or whatever, and I mentioned this on another podcast, suddenly they become a counselor and you can't borrow a dime. Like it's like, then how can you get anything when you do that? The other thing I wanted to mention on that 9% property tax hit, when I ran for mayor, one of the issues that my opponent was always talking about was I wanted a second ice pad for our facility. And she accused me of, or she said that would result in a 32% property tax increase. And I said, where have you ever heard of that? A 32% property tax increase anywhere? But you know,
you'd be a short-lived mayor.
That's right, be pitchforked out of town or whatever. Yeah. So once that financing proposal, and again, it included also, because you have to consider the operating aspect of it too, right? And replacement, right? The operating and replacement of
so it included operating and maintenance. And I'm going to say sort of life cycle type, not full replacement, but things that needed to be done over a 30-year period. So for instance, major refurbishment on the vehicles, it included that, but it didn't include, full replacement of the rails in, 50 or
Yeah.
60 years. So it included operating maintenance and what we call sort of life cycle type maintenance. The
Yeah.
other thing that, I think regional staff did a really good job of is saying, okay, this is 2011, we're working on this. We knew that the construction wouldn't actually take place until 2014, 2015. And
Right.
so we also factored in inflation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the
Like, who
estimated,
knows?
the
Yeah.
estimated, the estimated capital cost was in 2014 or 2015 dollars.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
when we were looking at that, future financing requirements, it included inflation, the
Yeah.
capital cost of the project, so the region's $250 million contribution, and future operating and maintenance and life cycle.
That's
And
so
so,
important.
and all of that worked out to a 1.2% tax rate increase each year over a 7-year period, 2012 to 2018.
Right.
And Rob, and then I'm going to add a couple other things. We also knew that to make this whole system work properly, we were going to have to significantly increase Grand River Transit bus service.
Right.
And all the cross corridors, right? And part of the whole selling feature of the LRT was it's going to be the spine of a system that's going to serve everybody. And so we knew we had to increase GRT service, and we also factored that in. So we baked in about a 0.3% per year tax rate increase to fund increased bus service. So that equaled the 1.5% per year. And I know that
Okay.
number
Yeah. I was going to say.
I knew you were going to come back to that. It was 1.5% per year.
Right. Right.
But part of that was
Okay.
funding improved bus service to feed the new spine that we were going to build. And so, again, I think regional staff did a good job of saying, you know what, we need to put it all together and not piecemeal this and not surprise people later and say, oh, well, by the way, in addition to this, we need more and more. So I thought, we in hindsight, we did a pretty darn good job of saying, here's the all-in costs and here's the financing strategy. And I'll go one step further.
Yes.
And I know you want to dive in, but there was also, fortunately, there were some offsetting savings that were going to hit in subsequent region budget years. So for instance, we had some debt on other regional projects that was being retired. Yes. So that was creating some financial capacity for the region to step into that. And the province was uploading some social service costs. So that also created a little bit of capacity for the region.
Oh, so not downloading, uploading.
Shockingly.
Hallelujah.
Yeah. So that created a little bit of financial capacity so that the net impact was, the net tax rate impact was about 0.7, 0.8% per year.
Wow. So, and I remember, Jim Wyden was spearheading this because by that time there were a few conflict of interest declarations, myself, and then Ken and Doug Craig and Tom Galloway, for example. So you've taken out, Ken and Tom not being there would have been like, those are your two most experienced counselors to help steer this through. And that must have been a bit concerning when you lose. It's like a ball team losing their, batters from the top four positions. That is Doug less of a concern. That was probably a benefit. That was the offsetting benefit probably with respect to LRT. But I was going to say that 0.3%. So I remember the 1.5. I probably missed that it was two components in the 6 to 8 inches of budget documentation that I had as a counselor. So, and the other thing I was going to mention on the inflation factor, that never really came to my attention until we had in North Dumfries when we had our own facility, and our staff submitted 2007 numbers for a 2009 build and never factored in inflation. And I can tell you, our cost overruns. One, I think there's a cost overrun just because of inflation, but there was also a cost overrun because during infrastructure, there are so many projects and only so many builders. And so that's going to cause prices to go up as well. And I guess the other factor too, when you look at today with supply chain issues, you can't factor in what the cost of material is going to be, or that's a shock to the system too. So fortunately, we didn't end up with that sort of thing happening as well. So congrats on that great being able to forecast that, and you came pretty well within, right? I mean, as you said, the ultimate impact was only. I remember Jim Weidman proclaiming the debt being finished off, and that this money was suddenly, this was not suddenly, but this money was available to help offset that. It was a pretty happy moment for him.
I think that's kind of what regional staff. It's what regional staff do. It's our job to basically say, okay, if this is a direction that the regional council wants to go, then our job is to say, okay, well, how can we make this happen? And look at all the options and the financing strategies. And I think we came up with a good financing strategy. And this is jumping way ahead, but when the system started up in 2019, the financing strategy was intact. It had paid all of the capital costs, and it was adequate to pay the operating and maintenance and life cycle costs.
So it held.
And so that was 8 years later, after we'd come up with this strategy, after it had been approved. Subsequent councils had stuck with it. They tweaked it a few times here and there, but more or less they stuck with it. So credit to subsequent councils. And we had the financing in place, and we'd managed the project well enough that we delivered it within that financing strategy.
Subsequent councils, but a consistent chair and staff through all that, which helped too. It's like the stars aligned just right. It's like when we started our little facility project in North Dumfries, it's like we had the right people who showed up to fill the right positions. And I think that's the same with the region. You had the right, I mean, if you look at that staff, the chairs of the different departments, that's like an all-star cast that the region had at that time.
We had an awesome team. We put together, we called it our Rapid Transit Senior Management Team. And so that included me. I mean, because it was so high profile, so big, across every department.
Well, you had to chair that for sure.
I chaired it. Thomas Schmidt was our Commissioner of Transportation Environmental Services. He was on it. He was great. Our Commissioner of Planning. So first it was Rob Horn. And Rob Horn, Rod Regier. They were great. Craig Dyer, one of the best chief financial officers in the province. Deborah Arnold, an awesome regional solicitor. Brian Stortz, our director of communications.
He's okay.
So we had, and then a series of rapid transit project directors. Graham Vincent, Nancy Button, Darshpreet Body. They were it's just a stellar
group. And Rob's role in terms of coming up with that development plan for all of the stations along the way, right? I mean, foretold basically the boom that we've seen in Waterloo region with respect to the buildings. Okay, but let's get back now to that 6-month period. So, you're starting out, there's a little turmoil. The chair's a bit earnest about it. Now he's got to drop off. Tom drops off. Doug and myself, we're like sidebar. But so what is it you're looking at then during that 6 months? You got the financing, which we just talked about. What else is relevant that is key to leading up to that June decision?
Yeah, so the financing strategy was probably the biggest part of it, right? It's because, the big debate was, can we afford this?
Right.
And the debate, I think, that was a completely legitimate debate to have. It's like, this is big, this is expensive. Can we afford it? I would say the advocates for light rail transit were saying, well, can we afford not to do this? So that was sort of the debate that was going on. But the financing strategy was key, because a lot of the focus was on affordability. So it's like, how can we make this affordable? So that was a big piece of work. But in parallel with that, we had done huge amounts of public engagement. And so we did another whole round of public engagement through the spring of 2011 to basically, now at this point now, we're starting to put in front of people financing options, impact on your property taxes. So this is, now getting away from abstract, like, oh, what do you think of light rail transit? And now it's like, what do you think of paying this much to get this kind of project and these kind of community benefits, right?
Yeah.
So that was a really important, I think, piece of public engagement. And that culminated, Rob, you may recall this, that culminated in regional council hearing public delegations in, I think, late May and June. Council heard over 100 delegations over 2 nights.
You know,
And
Jimmy worked hard.
that was, that was a marathon. And so those were probably the 2 biggest pieces of work that were going on in that 6-month period, was a lot of the financial analysis and affordability considerations, public engagement, and as I mentioned before, we re-engaged this expert panel to kind of peer review all the work that had gone on. And then all of that came together in June of 2011.
So 2 things. First, I just want to mention, you're talking about improving the GRT service, and I always remember the group from TriTag, and I couldn't have been more impressed with a group of volunteers who had such tremendous knowledge. I mean, the stuff they were coming up with respect to improving GRT and services, and, and talking about this route and the timing of that and the connection here, it was phenomenal. It
was totally phenomenal, really impressive. They were knowledgeable.
Yeah.
They were constructive.
Yes.
They were passionate about transit and city building. So, and they pushed the region, like they pushed regional staff. They pushed regional council, and you know what? And to their credit, they stayed engaged. Like this wasn't just a one-off. They stayed involved over the next 5 to 10 years, and they're still passionate transit advocates.
Yeah, I mean, they had logic and facts. I mean, that's how you look at. That's how you can fairly push. When you bring facts to the table and make such positive, concrete suggestions, and that was always an impressive thing to me. And then also too, I mean, the whole concept. So when you're re-engaging the team, did anything change from pre 2011, in terms of stations, number of stations or anything like that? Because it was, I guess it stayed Conestoga to Fairview Park Mall.
Yeah, it was, you know what, it stayed pretty consistent, because the work that had been done in, sort of 2008, 2009 on routes, alignment, station locations was really extensive. Like it was incredibly detailed. So it had landed on, a pretty good route alignment, pretty good station location. There were a few spots along the route that I think were still sort of open questions. There was some question through Uptown Waterloo about how the route was actually going to go.
The Caroline and Herb sort of area through there.
There's some really challenging spots, right? With the Urban Caroline intersection, some one-way streets, some narrow streets. So there was some questions about how to thread, I talk about threading the needle. How do you thread the needle through Uptown Waterloo?
Well, that is exactly
really,
what it's like.
Really challenging. And then related to that, it's like, well, especially when you start to get the system running in one direction on one street and a different direction on the other street, like a couple blocks over, then it starts to become, well, where do you locate the stations so that they serve people well? So there was some question in Uptown Waterloo about the route and exact station locations that I think actually didn't even get resolved in June 2011. I think that lingered on for probably another 6 months, and we sort of did some really, really deep dives into some route alternatives. But the bulk of it, like 95% was done and resolved in.
So the peer review pretty well affirmed the work that was done previously.
Yeah, it did. And they were, they were actually quite complimentary of the work that the region collectively, council and staff had done, which I think was helpful for regional staff. It was helpful for me as the chief administrative officer to get this, arm's length review by really knowledgeable people who had no stake in this, right? Like they didn't have stake in it. So it was helpful for me as the CAO to get this third-party view. I think it was helpful for councillors, because I think it was helpful for them to hear from not just regional staff, but from an other group. And then, then there was the 100 delegations too. And I think
Yeah,
that was.
I think it's look. I think it's good having been an elected official. And look, I love the staff, but every once in a while, you need to have a third party take a look at it. Like when we brought in KPMG, that's another day.
Oh yeah, another day. But no,
but
Rob,
I think that's
and
good.
especially on a decision this big, I think for council to get this objective third party view was totally appropriate. Totally
for sure. Because I remember, Doug Craig, the mayor for City of Cambridge, actually got his own assessment about viability and had that report that suggested that the ridership in Cambridge anyway just wasn't there. I guess at that time, I don't know if it was like looking at the future to support an LRT.
Yeah. And, I think we acknowledged all along that, and it still is the case, that Waterloo Region is probably the smallest community in North America that has a light rail transit system. We knew that as we were working on this. Now, having said that, the region's population was similar to population of City of Calgary, City of Edmonton at the time they built their first LRTs. Now they're much bigger now. They've grown and they've expanded their LRTs. But I think the point that this is a stretch. And I know that was the point that Mayor Craig was making, and that the review that he commissioned made the point that the region is at the small end of population and transit ridership that can justify an LRT, which we acknowledged. And then one thing that I think Chair Sealing was pretty consistent about saying, and I was, we're not necessarily doing this for today. We are doing this for the future. We're doing it for our kids and our grandkids. And we may not absolutely need this now, but we'll probably need it in 10 years. And in 20 years, for sure, we'll need it. Yeah. And to wait, which is something that's when people were saying, wait, just wait. Well, you know what? You're going to get 20 years of inflation.
Yeah, the costs,
20 years more urban development and probably sprawl. And it's going to be even harder 10 or 20 years from now to actually build it. So
and the funding,
those were some of the arguments on both sides.
And it took years to get funding. That funding doesn't happen in a matter of weeks. That funding takes years to generate.
And you got to get the stars aligned and election cycles to align and
and I think that's where regional chair was Ken Sealing was coming from when he said, look, we got the money, we got to do this now, because you don't get those kinds of funds all the time, and it's hard to coordinate with those upper tiers or the higher levels of government to get those funds. So so you've got the financing figured out, and the peer review feedback is good to go. Was there anything else that needed to be addressed before the June decision?
So I think then the only other piece of the puzzle for the region, and I think for regional council, was that sort of next round of public engagement and public input, and the 100 delegations, and that was we weren't quite sure how that was going to go, and we weren't quite sure what council was going to hear and from whom. What was fascinating and encouraging for me was the diverse views, that the diverse people and groups that came forward and spoke in favor of LRT. So some that you might expect. So there was chambers of commerce. They were concerned about cost, but overall said, yeah, this is probably a good thing as long as you guys manage the costs.
Yeah, it's good for business.
The tech sector and some of the big tech companies were strongly supportive of this. But then we had people like the Federation of Agriculture. President of the Federation of Agriculture shows up and says, you know what, this is critically important for the ag sector because it's going to help control sprawl, and it's going to help protect prime farmland on the
and hold the line is a rallying cry in Waterloo region. So that was
there's the tech sector and the president of Federation of Agriculture side by side. I think there was the Labor Council saying this is a good thing. There was the then president of University of Waterloo David Johnson, then became Governor General. But,
like,
I still
hold on,
remember.
just on David though, he's done so much stuff since. You think he was only president then? I mean, it's like you think he was president farther back because
I know. But so, I still remember him coming, sitting in the audience, lining up, taking his turn for his 5 minutes, like
yeah,
everybody else,
yeah,
and waiting for, 2 hours while, a whole bunch of people spoke. So, I just thought for regional staff, and I think for counselors, seeing, this diverse group like labor and the ag sector and the tech sector and the post-secondary education sector and
yeah,
healthcare. We had doctors lining up saying, this is creating a healthy community. Like all those voices, those diverse voices speaking in support. Now there were, so I think probably 75, 80% of the people who spoke
right,
were supportive. 20, 25% were strongly opposed. And I would say probably just about everybody who was opposed, it was a financial argument. It was saying, this is too expensive. We can't afford this.
yeah,
And so that, Rob, to your question. So to me, that was the last piece of the puzzle, was hearing from the public. And then I think council was ready to make a decision,
yeah.
big,
So you have to sit back. You're in your office and you're going, okay, look, we got everything done. We can have this vote anytime. Right. I mean, like there wasn't a specific date for the vote, but at some point you say, okay, we're ready to have the final piece. Final piece
at that point, we basically said, we've done all the staff work we can do.
Yeah.
Regional council, you need to make a decision.
Yeah.
And I think there was like 150-page. Well, no, it wasn't that long. It was a 25-page report, and in June of 2011. And you were there.
I was there quietly.
You were there, but you didn't vote. No. You were there, but didn't vote. So regional council voted 9-2 in favor of the project. And you rarely see moments like this as a municipal administrator, but there was a standing ovation by
that I remember. Yes, and the place was packed.
The gallery was packed. The vote happened. And it was a standing ovation, for the region. And that's unprecedented. I'd never seen that before, never seen it since. And I still remember it. So that was a pretty big day.
I remember there was when the agriculture and the hold the line and reducing sprawl, there were some people that say, well, then we should bring the townships in because it's a benefit to them as well in terms of funding, paying for the cost. But that's a whole nother issue. So
it is indeed.
So it's June 2011 now. That's sort of the start of the next phase.
Yep.
And would the end of that phase sort of be August 2014 when you put shovels in the ground for the facility in Waterloo, sort of the launch of the construction?
Yeah, that's probably a good way to look at it. You could split the next bit up, like so I would say the next part that we launched into, I'm going to call it the procurement phase.
Okay.
And then that phase ended with us selecting a partner to actually build and operate and maintain the system. And they started on the design process. But take 2010 to 2014, procurement and design, and then, groundbreaking in August of 2014.
Yeah, so, August 2014.
So talk about, some of the work that went on then through 2011, 2012, 2013.
So what was the first thing then you had to do now that, once you got over the drunken stupor of celebration?
Which lasted like, a day or two. And then it's like, sort of like the dog that chased the car and you caught the car and go, oh, well, now what do we do?
Now yes.
But I say that jokingly. We had a really good implementation.
Yeah.
So the next phase was basically looking at, okay, how are we going to implement this? Like, what's the strategy for procuring and building and operating and maintaining this system? What role is the region going to play, and what role are potential private sector partners going to play? Typical regional projects get implemented in a way that's called design, bid, build. We typically hire engineering consultants. Right. They design something. put together a great big Onken tender package, hundreds of drawings and thousands
Right.
of pages of specifications. We put it out to tender, contractors bid on it.
Yeah.
We typically hire the lowest bid, and they construct it. So that's
Right.
design, bid, build.
Right. Right.
So that was an option for implementation, but we thought this project is bigger and more complicated than anything we've ever done,
Yes.
and we're building something that we don't have experience operating and maintaining. Unlike other things like roads, the region operates and maintains
Sure.
roads and water
Yeah.
treatment plants and wastewater
Well,
treatment plants.
it's not the same as a bus system.
Right. So then we looked at how other light rail transit projects mostly in North America had been, call it, procured and implemented.
Right.
And one of the things that was evolving at that time in Ontario in particular, in Canada a little bit, was the whole concept of sort of public-private partnerships, or the other term that got used was alternate financing and procurement.
Right.
So we then looked at a whole range of options for involving the private sector. So saying, what role should the private sector play in design? For sure, we need to hire designers. For sure. We don't have the expertise on staff to design this. Construction. We don't build light rail transit systems. We need a private sector partner. Yeah. Then real big discussions about operating and maintenance. Should the region take this on ourselves?
Right.
Or should we engage a private partner to operate and or maintain the system?
That must have been the more difficult of the three things that you're talking about, because you've got you've got bus drivers, you've got, union, you've been dealing with that sort of thing. Some people might say, well, this is just an extension of that.
Yeah. So yes, looking at the operation and maintenance was the more complicated part. But what we pretty quickly concluded is operating a light rail transit system and vehicle is completely different than operating a bus and operating a bus system. Totally different expertise needed to operate and maintain it. So as we looked at that, we started to look at what other transit system operators had done, and we basically landed on a concept called design, build, finance, operate, maintain. So basically, it's bundling up with a private consortium the design, the construction, and the operation and maintenance. And I'll leave out the financing part for now, but the operation and maintenance.
So they would design, build, operation, maintenance, and the F part of that, the finance part.
We'll come back to the finance part in a second.
Yeah.
And so the big rationale for bundling all that together is every time you transition from one phase of a project to the next, there's real challenges with those interfaces. So there's always a bit of tension between the designer and the builder.
Right.
And in our typical design bid build, the contractors always complain about the design package, and the engineers always say, well, the design is great, the contractor's not competent.
You're taking the finger pointing out of this thing.
So the finger pointing happens at the interfaces between design and construction. And then once you build something, then there's always tension between the builders and the operators, because you try to commission something, the operators try to commission it. Like, wow, this is really challenging to commission. It doesn't quite work as it was supposed to. The builders must have messed up. And the builders go, no, this is fine. You don't know how to operate it. So there's always conflict between
that's a great point.
And the operator. And then there's conflict between whoever's operating a system and whoever's maintaining it. Right. And the people maintaining it go, oh, the operators are just grinding the system into the ground. Or
they'll say the builders gave you the wrong equipment or something like that, right?
Right. And the operator will say, no, the maintainers aren't maintaining the system properly. That's why it's so hard to operate. So as we looked at all of these interfaces, what we concluded was bundling all this up and saying to a private sector team, you sort it out. You sort it out. We actually don't care whether it's the designer or the builder or the operator's responsibility. It's your team's collective responsibility Let's sort this out.
And that's where litigation comes into play. I know with our facility, the architect had some drawings. There was some issues when the builder was pointing around, and next thing you know, there was litigation that came out of that because the builder said, I incurred higher costs because the architect didn't do or gave us the proper plans or got what they were supposed to get on time. And so you take that, and that's part of that finger pointing. So you take all that out. So it's brilliant.
So every big project inevitably has those disputes. And so what we were trying to do was minimize the risk of those interface type disputes. Now, bundling it all up, then that creates some other risks and other challenges. And we're basically contracting out operations. And so, then it's, well, how do you ensure that you've got good accountability, and how do you ensure that the public service is the way you want it? So there was some other challenges. The other thing that I haven't talked about, but I'll just mention briefly, is the finance component.
Yes.
And so the advice we got from our procurement advisors, which was Infrastructure Ontario, which is an arm of the provincial government.
Yep.
And they had provided procurement advice to the city of Ottawa on Ottawa's LRT project. They provide procurement advice to Metrolinx on some other big transit projects in the GTA.
Just on Infrastructure Ontario for a second. They were brought in shortly after or after the 2011 vote, the June 2011 vote.
Yeah. And we worked with them to look at these procurement options.
Did the provincial government make that a condition of their financing at all?
I think I have to look back. I think the condition of the financing was, at the very least, that we look at or consider these other alternate financing of procurement approaches.
Right.
I don't think they dictated the approach we had to use, but they, I think, required us to look at procurement alternatives.
But bringing in Infrastructure Ontario, that was the sole decision of the region?
That was the region's decision to engage Infrastructure Ontario, IO, as our procurement advisor.
And probably good because of their experience, right?
Absolutely. And, so we're into, probably close to $1 billion project, and dealing with multinational engineering and construction and operation companies.
Yeah, there's no staff at a municipal level that's going to want to be taking that one alone.
We and again, I think, to our credit, we acknowledged what we didn't know, and we acknowledged
and that's important.
That's expertise that we didn't have, that we needed to engage. So we engaged IO, we engaged Deloitte, good management consultants. We engaged a law firm who had extensive experience in these kind of projects. We engaged a engineering firm. But where I was going, Rob, with the finance part. So part of the advice we got from Infrastructure Ontario was, in a design, build, operate, maintain, also requiring the consortium to put up some of the financing. Like, basically what we required them was to put up $50 million of their own money. So basically the first $50 million of construction costs, we didn't pay.
I got you.
And we said, that $50 million of construction costs that you're putting up, we will pay you back in annual increments over the 30-year course of the project. And so basically we're holding some of their money to incent their adequate performance over a 30-year period.
And that's where the IO experience comes into play, right? Because you might not think of something like that. That's a brilliant concept.
Yeah, and even to get the amount right was a little bit tricky. You don't want to make it too much, because paying significant financing charges on it. But it has to be enough to kind of incent the sort of performance that we're looking for, but not so much that we're paying a significant, or not so much that we're paying a significant financing premium, because we can get money cheaper than any private sector company can get money.
Right.
And so we knew we were going to pay for that money, in terms of interest
whatever rate
costs.
They had to pay to get it. Yeah.
Right. So we had to find the sweet spot, and who knows whether we did or not, but it was what it was. So that's the model we landed on, was design, build, finance, operate, maintain. And so, that was just a fascinating journey to navigate our way through that, land on the model. Nothing's perfect, so there's pros and cons to that model.
Sure,
But
sure. Well,
overall, I
we're not
think,
here. Look, we're not here to debate that whole thing. We're just talking about which way you went, and you
yeah,
adequately explained why you went that way. Totally
yeah,
understandable. Who? So the next step then is to get what bid documents together to have some groups bid on this
yeah. So
project.
then we landed on that approach: design, build, finance, operate, maintain. Then we issued, it was a two-stage procurement process. So we issued a RF, request for qualifications, RFQ. So basically, what are the qualifications of the different teams? And then we shortlisted down to 3 teams. And
Did you
then
have a lot of teams interested?
I think there were 6 teams, maybe 6 or
Well,
7.
that's
And
not
these are,
bad for a project
and
this
these are
size. Yeah,
teams from all over the world,
yeah,
all over
yeah,
the world. Yeah.
yeah.
And so we shortlisted down to 3 teams. Then they took probably a year or so to work on their proposals. So we issued an RFP, request for proposals, very detailed, to those
That
3
would be a
teams.
lot of work to put together, wouldn't it? I
That
mean,
was a huge amount of work. And so that was work both on the technical side,
yeah,
basically, and what we created, because they were undertaking the detailed design. So we and our advisors didn't do the detailed design. What we put together is what's called output specifications. It's, here's the output or the outcome that needs to be achieved.
uh,
How, the
right.
how
Okay.
was left to the designers and the builders. So that's where it was different than a normal regional project, where we would specify
Right,
in
right.
excruciating detail, like the
Yeah,
paint color on, the tiles. Like, we would spec everything. Here we said, in some detail, here's the outcomes and outputs that are required. Team,
yeah,
you tell us in your
yeah.
proposal how you're going to achieve those outputs and outcomes.
So you're shifting the work a little bit.
Well, because it was a design build,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So they were then responsible for the detailed design and construction, which is different than a normal regional project where we would do the design and we'd tender it out to a
Now,
contractor.
in that scenario, I think it would be completely fair, and I can't recall if that was done, but you would probably pay them some money for the work that they had to put into their bids.
We did. Yep.
And
Yep.
that's completely, totally understandable, because they're
Completely.
coming up, they had to come up with the design and spend how long, a year or so to put this
It was
together?
something like a year. It might have been a little bit less, but there was a huge amount of work on their part to put
Yeah,
together their proposal. Now, in their proposal, Rob, they weren't doing the detailed design, right? But to put together their proposal, they had basically to cost it out, because they had to give us a
right.
fixed price.
Yeah.
So they had to do enough work in their proposal so that they could come up with a good cost estimate.
So was it the final 3 that did that work?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the first
Yeah.
6 were the first, the 3 out of the 6 was based on like reputation of the company, or what? You had a list of things. Yeah.
Reputation, qualifications, experience on similar
Experience. Yeah.
projects, experience with the project team,
Yeah. Yeah.
experience working together between the team members.
And that's interesting, because they're all like, it's like curling, where they go out and get other partners, new partners, to put their 4-person team together. So they're trying to reach and grab whoever they think is the best in show in the different areas, right?
Oh yeah, and what's fascinating to watch is, over time, different of these companies team up with each other. So you get different combinations emerging on different projects in different parts of the country. So, but then it sort of highlighted some of the challenges. So, by contracting out the design, what it meant is the region was giving up some control over some of the details. And that became a little bit of a point of friction sometimes, especially with, some community stakeholders who would have some really specific needs or wants. So we really want a fence here. And, we'd say to them, well, we didn't specify that detail. And, if the contractor includes it, it's included. If they don't, either they don't, or it's an extra because they didn't include it.
Like a
so there
fence
was,
for noise, for example, or something, or
well,
anticipated
like,
noise.
I'll give you, no, it would be more like, the fence they're proposing to build is a pretty basic chain link fence, and we want something more decorative that looks
Okay.
nicer.
I remember the concern of the church in uptown Waterloo, where there was going to be I don't know if it was going to turn or near their church, and they had like choir practice or something like that. So they were always concerned about what the potential noise situation was going on. I don't know if that ever panned out or not in terms of the.
They were concerned about noise. I think that it hasn't materialized.
So that's what I was curious about. So okay. So okay, so you're getting all this input, and they're putting it together. The name also is the marketing aspect, or putting a name on this thing is sort of happening at the in a parallel process.
Yeah. So sometime in there, I can't remember exactly, 2012, 2013, we went through sort of a whole branding exercise and a naming exercise. And I think part of the naming thing was with most things, we solicited public input and ideas, suggestions about the name. And I think we were very careful not to make it a vote, a popularity contest. We got input, and then I think we left it to regional council to pick the name.
Yeah, I seem to recall that it was a regional council decision.
It was absolutely a regional council decision. There's been other organizations that have done, name that train or whatever.
Yeah,
and these little contests are, they're often subject to people messing with them.
Yes,
you get names that you don't really
online votes, and
exactly. So Ion, emerged as a brand, and I think that resonated with people, and I
remember the potential usages and what you could do with it. There were a lot of flexibility in terms of how it would present as a graphic too. So so it's kind of nice to have a name to it as well, right?
Yeah.
When you're getting to that point.
Then the other thing, Rob, that was going on at the same time. So then, we went through that procurement process. We engaged the team. It was called Grand Link.
Yeah, I'm going to get back to that. I just wanted to sidetrack for a second on the Ion name. So, but back to the procurement process. Okay, once these teams are doing their thing, I guess there's another criteria or some sort of assessment process that goes on. And I also know there was a concern about one member of one of the teams as well.
Yeah, you can talk about that if you want.
Well, it's in the paper. SNC-Lavalin was a part.
SNC-Lavalin was one of the members of one of the shortlisted teams.
Yeah,
and there was concern. They were going through allegations about corruption at the time.
Yeah,
and so there was concern about, should we allow them to continue as part of the process? And I think the legal and procurement advice we got was, you need to let them continue.
And the other part of it too,
you got no basis for excluding them from this process.
The other part of it too was the suggestion that it was a different department or area of the company versus the group that was dealing with this project that was having the difficulties, we'll say, or the troubles.
So that, there's like so many wrinkles that happened in the course of this project, but that was one that, it complicated the procurement a little bit. But, anyway, we ended up getting 3 proposals from the 3 shortlisted teams, went through just an incredibly rigorous evaluation process. We had all these criteria, for each criteria, had all these scoring factors. We had separate teams looking at the technical proposals and a separate team looking at the financial proposals, and sort of a big Chinese wall or big wall between them. Those proposals were actually held in different physical locations.
Gotcha.
So that those evaluations happen completely separately. And then we put the 2 pieces together, the technical piece and the financial piece.
So was it like a rating, like a number system on either one, and then you just added the numbers together?
Put them together, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
But we didn't want the technical evaluation to influence the financial evaluation. Or vice versa. We didn't want the technical team to know, oh, this team's, cheaper. Well, that may be good, may not be good.
Right,
But we did not want the technical evaluation to be influenced in any way by knowing what the financial package was.
So
that
did the cheapest one win?
So that's never been made public.
Oh, okay. That's fine.
And won't be.
It's okay. I couldn't recall.
But,
so
yeah, no. The answer was the team with the highest rating was recommended.
Okay.
And that's exactly how it was set up.
Perfect. That's fair. That's totally fair.
Yeah. And so
it was within budget, right? Or was it? It was within budget.
Yep. It was within budget. Yep. And so the team that was selected and recommended was the team. They called themselves Grand Link. And the key players on that team were Aecon, a big Canadian construction company, Kiewit, a big US-based construction company. The operator is a company called Keolis, who operate light rail transit systems all over the world. And then two companies that put up the financing, Meridian and Plenary. So that was the Grand Link Consortium. And, the region has worked with them from, about 2013 and will for the next, 20 some years.
From my perspective,
we'll talk about it later. Go ahead.
Yeah. But from my perspective, it looks like it's been going pretty well. I like, you don't see, other than like a bubble, some issue about a bubble in downtown Kitchener. I haven't seen any big issues about anything with respect to Grand Link.
We'll probably, I think we'll probably run out of time in this podcast.
Yeah, we will. We're almost done now.
We'll talk about construction. No question, there were construction challenges.
Corduroy Road and all that other stuff.
And it's in the public realm. There was, some claims by the contractor for cost increases during construction that the region actually paid. Didn't pay as much as Grand Link was looking for, but settled.
That happens.
And it's inevitable. It's inevitable.
Let me just ask you quick. I had a note down here about Metrolink's Eglinton Crosstown project. Was that something that was like an example of?
So that's another light rail transit project that has been going on. It's been under construction for probably 7 or 8 years. Big, complicated LRT project. But it was procured in a similar way. Design, build, finance, maintain, and TTC is the operator of that.
Okay.
So Metrolinx will own it. So all I'm saying, I think, Rob, there's some similarities. It's way bigger in terms of scope and scale and cost.
Yeah.
So the other thing, I don't know if you want to get into now or was saved for chapter 3. Is the other thing that was going on in this same whole period of time was the vehicle procurement.
We're going to save that for chapter 3.
Okay.
The other thing I wanted to say, 2017 was the target for the construction.
It was.
And was that a bit of an aggressive target?
Late 2017, I think, was the target. It was aggressive. I think one way to manage budget on a big project is to manage the schedule. So it was aggressive. I think had the vehicles been delivered on time, we would have been closer to that.
Okay.
So this is, foreshadowing chapter 3.
The
vehicle delays complicated and delayed the project massively, probably contributed to 18-month delay. There were some construction delays too. But it was the vehicles, I think, that
So by the time we got to the groundbreaking on August 21st, 2014, we had the vote of June 2011. We had a name selected and we had Grand Link selected. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And Grand Link had started their design and started a little bit on construction up to the point of groundbreaking. And we'd ordered 14 vehicles from Bombardier.
Oh, yeah. Okay. And so that's where we're going to stop today. And we're going to take up the next chapter, which will include things like the 2014 election and a whole bunch of other great stuff. Mike, thanks again for coming in today, and look forward to the continuing story of ION. Thank you for listening to another edition of the Old Gray Mares podcast. If you have any ideas for stories or people you would like us to interview or reach out to, please feel free to contact us. And thank you again.